Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
What happened to four men in the Maine's Allagash wilderness area in 1976? What did they really see rising out of the trees? Who or what took them that night?
Hello, and welcome to the 836th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Ben, and those creepy questions came from my co-host, partner in Paranormal Adventures, and dad, Paul. And today we bring you two new guests we've come to know over the past year who witnessed one of the most famous UFO incidents in American history. We welcome your calls today. The number is 401-766-1240, and that's from anywhere, or you can email Paul at behindtheparanormal.com or contact us via Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
Now, coming to us via Skype today is Jim Weiner, and via the good old telephone, Charles Foltz, both eyewitnesses to the Allagash UFO incident in Maine in 1976. Jim is an artist and a near-death experiencer who has been an associate professor at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design's Computer Arts Learning Center in Boston. He and his twin brother, Jack, who also witnessed the Allagash incident, have had high strangeness and possible abduction experiences since early childhood. Charles Foltz is also an artist, a veteran of the U.S. Navy, where he was a nuclear technician. He attended the Massachusetts College of Art after graduation from college. He worked as a clinical medical photographer and medical artist in Boston for 39 years. They have appeared widely in the media, and the 1976 experience is documented in the book, The Allagash Abductions, Undeniable Evidence of Alien Intervention by Raymond E. Fowler, a great writer. They live in the Boston area and have been on our show once before as part of our live panel from the 2019 Exeter UFO Festival in New Hampshire. They were planning on being in the studio today, however, the things being as they are,
due to recent
and the health, due to uncontrolled circumstances, we've got them remotely today, but at least they're with us, so we're grateful for that.
Indeed. So Charlie Foltz and Jim Weiner, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal.
Hi Ben, hi Paul, Charlie. Honored to be with you.
Well, hey, it's great to have both of you gentlemen on. So I guess we'll take this one at a time. So whoever wants to start, maybe Jim, tell us your story.
Well, in August of 1976, Charlie and myself and my twin brother Jack and another camper, Chuck Rack, drove to northern Maine. And we initially spent a couple of days up on Mount Katahdin. We climbed Mount Katahdin and spent a couple of days up there. And afterwards, we took a bush plane to the Allagash Waterway Wilderness, which is north of Mount Katahdin, way up in the northern part of the state. It's basically a combination of lakes and river system that flow. The river itself flows north up to the Canadian border. And so after flying into the first lake of the lake system, it's called Telos Lake, we made camp on the first day. During that time, the local rangers, who are always up on the waterway system, came to check our camping gear, check us, make sure we weren't fugitives, that we had the necessary supplies and everything to be camping in the wilderness, because it is a wilderness area. So after doing that, we had our first camp, which was pretty uneventful. We did have a unexpected visitor that night, another camper who canoed up to our site with no supplies. And we shared our supplies with him that night. But other than that, it was pretty uneventful. The next day, we moved from Telos Lake up into the next lake in the system called Chamberlain Lake. And on Chamberlain Lake, the wind in that part of Maine is basically coming from the north to the south. So it's you're paddling against the wind, and it was a very hard day paddling against the wind. And by the end of the day, we had reached a campsite called Mud Pond, I believe it was called, and it was just getting to be nighttime. So we had pulled into, paddled up to the campsite, and there were other campers there. There was probably 8 or 10 other campers. And they had a fire going on the beach, and they were looking for 2 of their sons. I guess they had 2 sons that were out on the lake, and they were worried that they may not find their way back because it gets very, very dark at night up there. So we were all kind of looking out over the lake to see if we could spot their sons in their canoes. And while we were doing that, one of the campers said, "What is that weird star across the lake?" And when we looked in the distance on the far side of the lake, it was probably, I think we were looking east at the time, there was what seemed to be a very, very bright star just above the treetops. So I took out my binoculars and I looked at it through my binoculars, and I could tell immediately that it wasn't a star. It was something that was just on the other side of the lake, hovering, maybe 50, 100 feet above the treetops. And it had this odd quality to it, which kind of struck me odd. It wasn't like a regular light. It was a different quality of light. And I was only watching it for a few seconds, and all of a sudden the light just kind of winked out. And I thought, well, that was odd. Maybe it was a helicopter or an airplane or something. I didn't really think much of it, other than the quality of the light struck me as a little odd. But we went back to searching for these kids out on the lake, and after a few minutes they actually showed up. So that was the first time that we noticed some light in the sky that to me didn't seem right at the time. But so Charlie, you want to take over for a little bit? Tell them what we did next?
Well, after we left that campsite the following morning, we tried making our way further north to Allagash Lake, which is a primitive lake, and only paddling craft are allowed on the lake, no motorized craft. We worked most of the day trying to get up to this destination, and finally just gave in to the fact that we were not going to have the time that we needed to get to this location. So we abandoned that idea, went back down the river and made camp for the evening. The following morning we got up, went down, entered Chamberlain Lake again, and went over to a portage area to Eagle Lake. We had wanted to camp on Thoreau Island, or Pillsbury Island, on Eagle Lake at Thoreau campsite. There was another canoeist about a quarter of a mile or so ahead of us, and they went to that location. Having shared a campsite a couple of nights earlier with this other group, we wanted to hang out with our, amongst ourselves. So we had a secondary campsite, Smith Brook on Eagle Lake. We went over to Smith Brook and set up our camp and gathered wood for a fire because we decided we were going to go out on the lake fishing to supplement the supplies we had purchased prior to going on to the lake. We thought we'd add some fresh fish to our menu. So we set up our campsite, lit the fire to act as a beacon so we would be able to find our way back to this campsite at night. That far north, you're isolated in the wilderness, as Jim was saying, and when it gets dark, you can feel the heat from your hand in front of your face, but it's so dark you cannot see your hand in front of your face. Well, we were out on the water. It took us maybe about 20 minutes or so to work our way through the standing deadfall, the trees that were up at the end of the lake where the stream was coming into the lake. We thought that would be the best place to fish because of all of the fallen trees, the dead structure, all that type of habitat's great for fishing. And we just began to fish, and it's dark, and the other fellow named Chuck called our attention to something that he, struck him as odd, and we looked at toward his end of the canoe, and I saw this sphere of light, which I immediately thought was the moon. But just as quickly as I thought it was the moon, I dismissed it as not being the moon because of the way it was moving. You could definitely see that it was moving in our direction, coming along the tops of the trees, maybe about 40 feet above the tops of the trees or less. The tops of the trees were illuminating as this ball of light approached us, and when it was, perhaps 100 yards away from us, I picked up a flashlight we had in the canoe, one of those square battery flashlights with the handle and the push-button switch. I put my hand over the lamp, turned the light on, and I semaphored an SOS, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, just to see what it would do. When I did that, this sphere of light immediately stopped moving forward, and a beam of light appeared directly beneath this sphere, and this beam of light, which had a bluish quality to it, sort of like a blue neon light, but it looked like a gigantic glass straw in appearance. How you can see through a glass straw, but you can see the walls of the straw. And this quality of light had an appearance like that, except it was large enough to engulf an automobile. And when we saw this light coming in our direction, I myself was no longer curious about what this thing was or would do, and dropped the flashlight, grabbed the canoe paddle, and tried paddling to our campsite. Jack and Jim joined in, helping me move the canoe along. Jack was encouraging me by yelling, "Paddle, Charlie, paddle." If I could have run, I would have ran, but I've certainly got my feet wet. But it seemed like it only took us a few moments to return to our campsite, where Jim and Jack and I were standing on the beach. Chuck was still seated in the back of the canoe. I picked the flashlight up again, and this sphere of light was now near our campsite, close enough that you could have picked up a baseball and thrown it at this thing and hit it. It was maybe 40 feet above the top of the water, and I shined the flashlight at it a second time. When I did that, it moved directly away from us across the lake, and then began to ascend up into the night sky at a 45-degree angle. I don't know why, but at the time I felt that this thing was about to go very fast. So I took the flashlight and I shined it at the sweep hand of my wristwatch, and I noted that it was after 10 p.m. I looked at the sweep hand and looked back up at this light in the sky, and it just shot straight out very quickly, and was soon a pinpoint of light lost in among the stars. I looked back at my watch, and less than 8 to 10 seconds had elapsed between the time this thing began to ascend until it disappeared. At no time did it make any noise whatsoever, nor did it disturb or displace the tops of the trees or the surface of the water as it hovered above these things. A helicopter would have had noise associated with it, as well as air displacement, which would have moved the trees all over, as would a prop of a helicopter disturb the surface of the water. But this thing was not a helicopter. I mean, I was in the military. I've seen just about every type of aircraft that we have flying, and this was nothing that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the next day, that night, when we got away from the water in our canoe after this craft disappeared, we walked up to our campsite, and my three companions all sat at these picnic tables that were available, and I walked over to where the fire was, which was my reference point as I was paddling back to our campsite. And now the campfire, I discovered, was completely burned out. Little wisps of flame and coals were all that remained of our fire. But yet, when I was paddling toward our campsite, I could see the fire burning brightly. I didn't really think very deeply on this fact that the fire had extinguished that quickly, and I asked my friends if they wanted I should throw some more wood on the fire, and they looked at me like, "What are you, nuts? We're turning in." So everybody just sort of stumbled off and crawled into their sleeping bags, and that was it.
Charlie, can I add some detail?
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Absolutely.
Just to back up a little bit, when we were in the canoe and we first saw this craft hovering over the treetops, I immediately recognized it as the same kind of light that we had seen prior from the other campsite that I was looking at through my binoculars, because it had this, it was almost like a roiling quality to it. It was, it moved. It was like it was alive. It reminded me of what the inside of a pottery kiln looks like at very high temperatures. I, at the time, was attending graduate school at Boston University in ceramics, and I was very familiar with firing kilns and doing the whole ceramic thing. So that's what it reminded me of. But this was this was some kind of energy that was, it literally seemed alive, like it was constantly roiling and moving and glowing. Like I couldn't see a solid object. It was as if you were just watching this ball of energy just roiling above the treetops. And it was big. It was as big as a 2-story house. This thing was huge, and it made absolutely no sound, as Charlie said. And we were actually downwind from it, because that day the wind had shifted from the north to the south. So we were downwind from this thing, and it made absolutely no sound whatsoever. So that was one of the strange things that was about this craft, was this seemingly alive energy that seemed to be surrounding it and the way it moved. I saw it mostly as a yellowish, whitish color overall. Jack saw yellow, whitish. Charlie saw yellow, like a band of yellow. Charlie, did you remember whether that band was vertical or horizontal?
Well, as I recall, it was rather vertical.
Yeah.
Kind of reminded me if you had like a 25-watt incandescent light bulb, and you were looking at the lamp, you turn it on, turn it off, close your eyes, and the after image that you would have would be the closest thing I could think of that would be close enough to represent what we saw. But like Jim said, the surface of this thing had motion and movement to it, sort of like if you've seen NASA images of the surface of the sun. It had that type of quality and texture to it, but it was white with a kind of a yellow to it.
Yeah.
From my vantage point, Chuck saw it in quadrants, and he saw red in it that I did not see. But then he was kind of a portrait artist, so his maybe his way of looking at things, he saw other colors in there that I did not notice at first.
Yeah. He also said he saw green, too, which I don't remember seeing. Mm-hmm. The other thing I wanted to add, excuse me, is when we were, after we had gotten back to the campsite and were standing on the beach watching it, when this thing took off, it imploded into itself, almost like an iris on a camera. And it just went from the outside edge to a dot, and then it disappeared, and then a second later it was higher up in the sky, and you could see this beam coming out from in front of it. It seemed to be following this beam up into the sky, and it would kind of wink out for a second, and then the next second it would come on again, but it would be higher and further away, so it gave you this kind of overall image of it, almost like walking up a stairs, but it really wasn't like stepping up a stairs. It was just the way it appeared, because it would blink off and then blink on again for a second and then keep going, and it made no sonic boom at all when this thing was flying away, and it had to be going many, many times past the speed of sound. So at that time, I couldn't think of any conventional craft that could be at all.
Now, how about the abduction?
We'll go back to the campsite. Before we went out to go fishing, I just want to make clear that we built a very large campfire. We built what's called a long burning fire, or sometimes some people call it an upside down fire. Mm-hmm. Because you put your small brush and logs on the top of it and your big heavy logs on the bottom. So as it burns down, it takes longer to burn. And so that's the kind of fire we had made. So we created this fire deliberately to burn a long time, because we figured that we would be out on the lake for a couple of hours at least fishing. And from the time we left the campsite to the time we saw this craft and then paddled back again seemed to me to be 15 or the most 20 minutes. We just had gotten out on the water when we saw this thing. So we weren't out on the water long at all. And certainly not long enough that coming back in 15 minutes, the fire would be completely burnt. But as Charlie said, we didn't, we kind of thought it was a little odd that the fire was burnt down, but we really didn't think much about it. I mean, we were kind of...
Well, because fires always burn out.
Like we were really tired and almost in an anesthetized state. I can't explain it, but we really didn't think a whole lot about the fire, why it had burnt down the coals when it should have still been burning very brightly. But
so how much time do you think?
At the time we never heard of missing time or anything like that. So that thought didn't occur to us.
Okay.
Plus fires always burned out, so we didn't really even spend any time that evening talking about what we just experienced. But yet in the morning when we were breaking camp, that was all we talked about.
Right.
We even flagged down the first ranger we saw that day to tell him what we had seen. And he was this older fella, and he kind of looked at us, and he goes, "Lights, eh? Well, they got a brand new hardware store down in Millinocket with them Hollywood-style searchlights, and that's what you boys probably saw." Well, Millinocket was 90 miles due south to us, and Mount Katahdin, which is 1 mile high, would have been directly in our line of sight. That night it was a clear sky, so we didn't discuss further with this ranger what we had seen.
Well,
but
all right, fellas, we're going to take our bottom of the hour break right now, and then we'll go back to our discussion. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back with Charlie Foltz and Jim Weiner on the Allagash case in just a moment, so stick with us.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to The Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific Time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
Local and live at 99.5 FM.
Okay, and we're back behind the paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM, local and live on 99.5. And we're speaking today with two of the witnesses of the Allagash UFO incident of 1976, Charles Foltz and James Weiner. Now, fellas, we have a lot of questions from listeners, so we kind of have to move along a little bit. Can you tell us when you realized or came to believe that you had actually been abducted in that missing time slot?
Well, actually, that probably didn't really strike us for almost 10 years.
Wow.
When Jack and Jim began simultaneously having nightmares that were very eerily the same, except that they didn't share their nightmares with one another. At that time, they were living about 150 miles apart, and they began having these weird nightmares where the four of us were in an unusual location and situation, being examined by, for lack of a better word, gray ETs. We didn't know anything about stuff like that when this all began. And Jim, who at that time happened to be a housemate of mine, I lived in a very large rental property in Brookline, Massachusetts, and my other housemates and I were concerned about Jim's odd behavior. In the middle of the summer, he began... Do you mind if I share this, Jim?
No, go right ahead, Charlie.
Well, Jim began padlocking his room from the inside and locking his windows, and my housemates and I became quite concerned about this, and Jim was very tight-lipped about it, really didn't share what was going on, and it became enlightened to us because of Jim's episodes. His medical care providers at the time also observed Jim's agitated behavior, and one of his caretakers began questioning him, and I'll let Jim take it from here.
Yeah. In 1978, I had a freak accident that left me with some spinal and brain damage. I won't get into the details because it will take too long. But anyway, I was being treated for seizures. I was having temporal limbic seizures because of the brain damage. And at the time, Charlie just mentioned, I was being treated at Beth Israel Hospital in Boston. They have a whole team that works with, brain trauma people. And I was having a lot of seizures at the time. And so they noticed that I would be coming in regularly, and they noticed I was agitated and I wasn't sleeping. And so they questioned me as to, what's going on? Why aren't you sleeping? And blah, blah, blah. And I was saying, well, I'm having these nightmares, these horrible nightmares, or I think somebody's like coming into my room at night, and they're walking around in my room, and they're coming up to my bed, and it's freaking me out, and I can't sleep. And so one of the team members at the hospital had me sit down, and at first I didn't want to talk about it. I was like, they're nightmares. Everybody has nightmares. What are you going to do? All nightmares are bad. So what? But anyway, they said, well, you can't have that attitude. You need to talk about this stuff. So I was telling them about my nightmares that I was having, and one of the doctors there said, geez, this sounds really weird. I think you need to talk to somebody about this. And I was like, well, talk to who? And it turned out that this one particular doctor was acquainted with Dr. John Mack from Harvard at that time. And I guess he knew what John Mack was just starting to do his research with abductees. And he said, well, I just had a meeting recently or dinner or something like that with this doctor. And, maybe you should see somebody about this. And then he asked me this weird question. He said, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had an experience with UFOs? And I was like, what, are you crazy? What does that have to do with this? And he's like, well, I'm just curious. And so I was like, I thought we were talking about nightmares and seizures. I don't see that has anything to do with UFOs. But anyway, this conversation went around and around and around. And finally, he convinced me that I needed to talk to someone, and this doctor was the one who contacted Ray Fowler and said, I'm sending one of my patients to talk to you, and would you please see what you can get from this guy? So that's how I met Ray Fowler.
Yeah, who wrote the book on the case.
Yeah, he took over the case and wrote the book. So once I met him and told him about the Allagash experience, he said, well, you had a UFO experience? I said, yeah, a long time ago, I was, on the Allagash, blah, blah, blah. And so he decided he wanted to look further into the case and opened up an official case study on it through MUFON. And he had me contact Charlie and Jack and Chuck Rack and see if they wanted to participate in this, which we all did. He then asked us if we wanted to be willing to undergo hypnotic regression. So we agreed to that, and in fact, all four of us went through hypnotic regression sessions. We promised not to discuss any of the content of any of our remembering anything that came out, which we did. We didn't talk about it amongst ourselves, and it took a little over a year for multiple sessions, but eventually Ray finished the hypnotic regression sessions. And one day he called us in and gave us the results, and he said, based on your independent transcripts, what came out of your hypnotic regression sessions, it appears as if you have experienced an alien abduction. So that was the first time we actually had to sit down and face the possibility that we were abducted by aliens.
Okay. Well, I think we'd better move to
wait.
our question, or we're not going to get to any. Sorry to cut you short. We can do another show, I think.
No, we need 2 hours for this.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We have a question from Lauren from Connecticut. And if you would.
So Lauren writes to us, thank you very much for the interesting show. My question is, what did the men do to make peace with their harrowing experience so that they could then go on and live a normal life?
Okay.
Charlie, you lead off on that.
Well, I mean, I guess after we came back from our trip, we had shared over the course of the next 12 months with every friend that we had our experience being chased across the lake by the UFO. And after that year, you know, I had finished my college education and I began working in the medical field as a medical photographer and a medical artist. And, you know, I just became obsessed with this type of field. I didn't know why, but working with medical research scientists, working with surgeons in the medical area just became sort of like an obsession with me. At the same time, Jim's brother Jack, who after the Allagash became kind of obsessed with mathematics, and I mean real trigonometry, geometry, calculus. He was just obsessed with mathematics and started incorporating mathematics into his artwork, first as two-dimensional and then eventually the three-dimensional things. Jim, his artwork prior to our trip on the Allagash had been like utilitarian pots and bowls and tea kettles and, you know, pictures, things of function and beauty. But yet when we came back from the Allagash, his artwork just changed drastically, dramatically, almost cosmically in shape and form and color and, you know, but yet at the same time, none of us were aware of these changes in the directions of our lives. Jack went on to work in the U.S. space industry as one of only two people in the state of Vermont capable of running equipment that coded optics, lenses, and filters that were used by NASA. Jack worked on the repair package for the Hubble telescope. He also had handled the optics that are on the two land rovers and satellites going around Mars right now. But, I mean, you know, all of us were just nothing but, you know, artists at one point with an art career in mind. I intended to be a teacher, but yet only began teaching art after I retired a few years ago.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers your question or
Yeah,
not.
it does. But I think probably the main question we need to get to is what happened during the abduction according to what was discovered during the hypnotic sessions.
Oh, well.
That's kind of relevant to our topic.
I'll chime in. What they found from the hypnotic regression sessions is that we were taken aboard this craft and we were basically subjected to, it was like physical. I mean, I remembered it. I kind of made an analogy that I felt like a polar bear that had just been darted in the Arctic, and they've been given an examination where they look at your body and run the tests on you. I felt like it was a lab. At one point, I was terribly frightened that they were going to, perform an autopsy on me, or cut me open. It was really, really frightening. It was terrifying. I remembered under hypnosis them examining my brother Jack with some kind of wand device, and seeing Charlie Foltz and Chuck Rack sitting on a bench. We were all naked. I remembered them taking a sperm sample, and I remember them putting some kind of devices on my ankles so I couldn't kick with my legs. I remembered them appearing. Like, I remember telling Ray Fowler in the hypnosis, they looked like bugs. They looked like insects. They had faces like an ant. And they had some kind of weird clothing, like skin tight clothing, like skiers wear. It had a sheen to it. Jack remembered having some kind of buckle, like a belt buckle device. And Jack did some really good detailed drawings of what their hands looked like. They had 4 fingers and a foldable palm so that the fingers could oppose one another. Charlie remembered being under a kind of some, I don't know what the heck you would call it, was some kind of scanning device. So all 4 of us remembered being on this craft, being with these alien beings among us, and being subjected to some kind of physical examinations.
Okay, now I just want to point out that for those who are not listening, watching the TV feed of the show here, you can go to behindtheparanormal.com, and there's a link for the talking points, and then the link for the 2020 shows, and this is right at the top. Pictures of our guests and some artwork courtesy of our guests that they did about this experience, so you can go online and see what we're talking about here. Okay, did you have anything to add to that, Charlie?
Well, yeah. I think that's perhaps what stimulated my interest in going into the medical field, as after going through regression, it seemed to me as a logical step off for me to pursue this area. I was discussing at one time with one of the research physicians I worked with, about this panel that came down over my chest during this examination that Jim had just mentioned, and how my chest was enveloped in the same type of blue illumination that this beam that approached us while we were in the canoe. And I, at the time, was doing photography of patients using ultraviolet film, and I was photographing the vascular, the blood system in people by photographing their body, and with ultraviolet film and light sources, you can see beneath the skin and see the blood vessels. So as I was discussing this light and the quality of it with this physician, we were talking about different types of scanning. MRI scanning was just brand spanking new back at this time, new cutting edge technology. And oh geez, I'm getting sidetracked in my brain.
Oh no, just perhaps there's an explanation you fellows hadn't considered. That given the untended fire on the beach, you may have encountered the self-appointed fire prevention officers of the galaxy. Here, that's I'm attempting to joke here, but anyway, we have another question, and this is. I'm sorry. Smokey
the alien.
Yeah, yes. That's right.
Only aliens can prevent forest fires.
The headgear. This is a question from Peter in Bogota, Colombia, who is a faithful listener and a frequent sender of good questions.
Sure. So Peter writes to us. He has two, so we'll just take them one at a time. Hopefully we have time for both. After the original experience, Charlie, I understand you had an abduction in 1995, and Bud Hopkins did a regression. Can you please share the details that came out of that regression, if the incident is related at all?
Bud Hopkins being considered one of the greatest experts on this in those times. Okay.
Well, and again, this was in August of 1995. I had the night during the evening of what I thought was a flashback dream of the Allagash, and the next morning I was seated on the front step having a cup of coffee and reading a book when Jim came out smoking a cigarette. We started talking, and I said, I had a really bizarre dream last night. He was there like, wow, that's weird because I had a similar dream myself. And did you happen to notice the ivy on the house next door across from your bedroom? I had a master bedroom on the second floor. Directly beneath me, Jim and his wife, Carol, occupied the master bedroom suite on the first floor. The house next door to us was covered from the ground to the gutters with ivy, and this was on a stucco surface, which is a concrete mixture, and ivy hangs on to that type of structure. Well, ivy will grow literally on glass and anchor itself to glass quite securely. And this entire building on that side of the house was covered with ivy, except for a large circle that was bare right down to the stucco, and that was like a giant cookie cutter had removed it. Well, Jim and I were looking at that, and we both realized that we had very similar dreams the night before, yet they were different in detail from what we recalled on the Allagash. I remember being conducted to the corner of my room where I had a door to a balcony, and that was the next thing I remember was like being escorted. I had an alien on each arm guiding me down this passageway. And Jim, as I recall, had thought that there was a police vehicle just outside of his bedroom window, and for it to be outside his bedroom window, it would have had to have been at least 10 or more feet, 10, 11, 12 feet off the ground in order to be outside the bedroom window of his apartment. But what do you remember from that, Jim?
Well, I remembered waking up in the middle of the night and seeing this blue light outside the one of our bedroom windows. You could see it around our shade, and I couldn't move in the bed. It was exactly 3:32 in the morning, I think, or 3:33. And my wife, I tried to wake my wife. She wouldn't wake up. And when I tried to get up, I felt like I couldn't move. And that was all I consciously remembered. The next morning when I woke up, I had this flash memory of something being in our room and me running towards the corner of the room to get away from it. That was my conscious memories. Anyway, what came out of the hypnotic regression with Bud was that I did get up, and there were these beings in our room, and I ran out of the room, down out of the back of the house into the driveway to escape. And when I got out into the back of the driveway and looked up the driveway, there was this craft floating like 8 or 10 feet above the surface of the driveway in between the two houses. And there were these beings back there, and they didn't say anything to me, but it was like you get a mental impression that they wanted me to get into that craft, which I didn't want to do. And then the next memories that I had under the regression was being in a craft somewhere. I was in a room with a portal looking at something. I don't know if it was either a projection or whether I was looking outside, but it appeared that I was out in space somewhere looking, but it wasn't like regular space. It was very light, almost whitish rather than black, with stars. And I remembered seeing that, and I remembered seeing some the way the structure of the room had these curved beams in them that had some kind of, it looked like hieroglyphics. I wasn't sure if it was just a design feature or if it was some kind of writing. I couldn't get a clear picture of it under hypnosis. We didn't have enough time to.
Okay, fellas, I'm afraid I'm going to have to, we're just about out of time. Can you tell people where they can find out more about you online and where they can get the book, The Allagash Abductions by Raymond D. Fowler?
Well, the book.
Well,
go ahead, Charlie.
You could probably easily find us on the web under Allagash 4. The word ALLAGASH with the numeral 4. And the book can be probably found through Amazon, also online.
Okay, very good. All right, well, fellas, we're going to have to do another show because we have lots of other questions we didn't get to, and thank you so much for being with us. Stay safe, and we'll have you back on very soon to continue our discussion.
All right, and don't forget to wash your hands after this radio broadcast.
Absolutely. Yes. I'm going to take a shower, actually. Not because of you fellas, because we're out in the universe here. And don't start any more fires. Okay. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Play with flashlights responsibly.
Yes, exactly. Okay, Ben, take it away for the announcements.
Alrighty, so unfortunately we did have to cancel a majority of events. Most of our spring events have been canceled due to the global pandemic, but coronavirus allowing, we will be at the Exeter UFO Festival on Labor Day weekend. That's September 5th and 6th. And we hope, as speakers, to do our 5th annual live broadcast from the historic Exeter Town Hall on Sunday the 6th at noon. And the event is sponsored by the Exeter Area Kiwanis Club for local children's charities.
And it's possible that our guests today, Charlie Foltz and Jim Weiner, may be there again this year, that we got to spend a couple of days with them at the festival last year in New Hampshire, so we hope we'll see them there this year. There will be other events throughout the year, hopefully, including the Greater New England UFO Conference in Leominster, Massachusetts on Columbus Day weekend. I have been honored to be the keynote speaker this year to mark my, 50-year paranormal work anniversary. Also in October, look for us on the Travel Channel, though we cannot give you any details right now.
So you can check out our books, including Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong, and Behind the Paranormal 2, Bigfoot, Mothman, and Monsters You've Never Heard of. And now, Dancing Past the Graveyard, Poltergeist, Parasites, Parallel Worlds, and God. They're available from online retailers and in some stores, but for autographed copies, please visit the online bookstore at BehindTheParanormal.com once the site is back online.
Right, yeah. Well, the site is online. It's just all the recorded shows are not there. However, they are, most of them, back to the beginning of 2010 on all the major podcast platforms, YouTube, iTunes, etc.
Yes.
So you can check those out then.
Okie dokie.
All right, so what do we have next week?
Next week, that would be Sunday, March 22nd, we'll have dream expert and coast-to-coast AM web producer Lex Nover to talk about the true nature of dreams.
And we leave this afternoon with a quote we didn't get to last week from one of my favorite guys, the 13th century Persian poet and theologian Rumi. We carry inside us the wonders we seek outside us. I'm Paul Eno, and stay safe out there.
I'm Ben Eno, and we have approximately 15 seconds left.
Okay, so stay safe out there,
Yes,
folks.
make sure you wash your hands. Apparently sunlight is good as well.
Yeah, well, take it seriously.
Yes,
Very
yes,
important.
please.
Okay,
Please be responsible.
Yes.
I'm Ben Eno, and thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.